One of the most exciting things about the Alumni Network is finding out what everyone has been up to since they worked at PwC. And I'm super excited to be interviewing a bunch of really interesting former colleagues to find out what they've been up to since they left the firm. This is your PwC Alumni Network with me, Andy Woodfield. Today I'm going to be talking to Paul Cleal. Paul was with the firm for more than 23 years in a number of really exciting roles, both in the UK and internationally, culminating in a board role looking after people across the whole of the UK firm. Today, Paul has a great portfolio career as a non-exec director, and he has a great role with the Football Association as an equality ambassador. And I'm particularly excited to talk to Paul because we used to work together. I did a Colour Brave carpool interview with him a few years ago on race and equality. So I'm very much looking forward to finding out what's going on with Paul these days.
Hi, Paul. It's great to see you. I've not seen you for ages.
Yeah, good to see you, Andy, as well. Yeah.
Well, I try my best. Can you do us a bit of an intro to yourself and your career so far?
So, as some people watching this will know, I was a partner in PwC for 16 years until 2017. In that time, I was a board member both in the UK and then latterly in Africa, based out in Lagos for a short time towards the end of my career with the firm. And since 2017, since I left, I built up a portfolio of advisory and board level roles, so non-executive director stuff, including Guy's and St Thomas's NHS Foundation Trust, which is now, as of our recent acquisition, the biggest, I believe, NHS trust in the country. Metropolitan Police, which is definitely the biggest police force in the country. And the Premier League, where I'm their board advisor on equality. So they're probably the three biggest roles I've got at the moment. And there's a range of other ones primarily connected to education and social mobility, which I do on a pro bono basis and really try and fit those around the roles I've got. So that's kind of what I do. And I guess being a non-exec advisor, mostly I'm concerned with strategy and governance within organisations these days, which very much builds on what I've done before in my executive career.
In those non-exec roles, do you feel like you're getting the same kind of traction that you would have got in a more of an executive role that you would have had in the past?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think I'm personally quite well suited to these sort of roles. I mean, there are some people who you and I would know from our PwC careers who you might describe as having control freak tendencies or not being so good at delegation, shall we say. I think I was always better at delegation than many. I like empowering people. So one of the problems that some people find when they leave their executive career to go to be a non-exec is that they kind of interfere too much, I suppose, and from the perspective of the executives who don't really want to be told sort of how to do their job on a sort of daily basis. So yeah, I find that actually it takes away a lot of the heavy stuff that you have to do to keep the organisation running, which the executives all do, and I can come in and do the more, what I find more interesting, high level stuff around strategy in particular, to think about what we should do differently. And often I find that I bring a different view because of the variety of backgrounds I've got.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like I need to get myself out of PwC and do the same thing. I
think you'd enjoy it as well. I think because you think differently to other people, whereas within an organisation that can sometimes be a bit draining energy-wise, always being disagreeing and proposing something different. Actually, when that becomes your job, I find it's good, and you're doing it in different places and for less time. So I like the variety too.
I asked a question about sort of impact because I suppose you're advising. I just wonder do you see the impact of the advice enough? You can't actually action it yourself, can you? You're kind of nudging and inspiring, I guess, more than actioning.
Yeah, and the roles do vary in that respect. So some of them are pure advisory, like the Premier League, where effectively, you're offering advice and they can take it or leave it to a degree. Although in that case, as has happened a couple of times, where there are gaps in, if you like, who's around to do the executive role, then I do occasionally get asked to do some of that too. But then at the other extreme, in the NHS, as a board member, you're a voting board member and you're making a decision. So you're responsible for approving, pretty significant things. Can you imagine the early days of COVID when, we've got a plane flying out to China with Virgin and trying to buy £9 million worth of PPE, and someone's got to approve it, and that falls to the board ultimately to be responsible for that sort of thing. So you do have actual responsibility in some cases. So there's a spectrum between, I guess, having responsibility for decision making jointly with some of the execs or approving stuff, and at the other end just providing advice.
So you touched a bit on this last year or so and COVID. What have been sort of the really big sort of mountains you've had to climb, big challenges this year?
Well, I suppose on one level I've had the same challenges as everyone else, not being able to travel anywhere, not be able to see important people. From a working perspective, I would say the biggest challenge to me is that some of the roles I've got are quite new and have developed over the last 18 months. And for the newer ones of those that came really after the lockdown started, I've had to do that without much, if any, physical presence contact. And the importance of building trust and building relationships, and inevitably you can do it to a degree in these formats like talking over video as we are now, but it's a hell of a lot easier, isn't it, when you've known someone for years to do that. When you've got to meet someone for the first time and get to know them, then it's much harder. And you were asking about do I know my advice is taken on board, and I suppose that's harder to tell sometimes when you're remote. But I had, one of the organisations, a really senior board member, say to me the other day, and I pitched into a discussion remotely and said something that I couldn't even tell really whether it had been taken on board in the moment or even heard. And he came back to me and said, "Oh, you said something the other week," and he played back to me what I'd said, and it really changed his entire approach to something. So you really never know.
Yeah,
it's much easier to check that it's being effective on the day when you're in the room, obviously. So yeah, having to build those relationships remotely is hard, much harder than I would normally find it, and as a result, I think that's probably the biggest challenge of operating this way.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think it's fine to work remotely like this when you know people already. It's easier, isn't it? Or you already know them.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Starting this being your introduction to them, I think is completely different. Have you subsequently been able to meet any of those people face to face?
Yeah. So you find out that they're either shorter or taller than you realised, or
I know, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. So some of them, I've been lucky with Guys and St Thomas's. I was already there before, so I got some of my induction in. But it has curtailed what I can do in terms of physical time in the hospital, because normally as a new board member you'd be going out to the wards and spending time there, and I was only able to do that a bit. I went out with some of the community nurses, for example, and you can't with COVID restrictions obviously do that, particularly to go and see vulnerable people.
Yeah.
So but at least I did start there. Met police. I was interviewed remotely, but we've actually had quite a few in-person board meetings over the course of the last year. The top team are in New Scotland Yard for operational reasons anyway, so they get together, and it's just a question of doing it in a COVID compliant manner, which in January basically means opening all the very, very large windows and freezing yourself to after breath or wearing coats and stuff in meetings. But yeah, the football Premier League stuff, which is about half my time over the course of the last 9 months, I actually only had my first in-person meeting last month. So there's a whole load of people who I've never actually met in person. But that's proved manageable, but not ideal. I
always found your role with the Premier League really interesting, and I remember talking to you when you were kind of going into that. And it seemed like a role where you could make a big difference. Obviously, you and I have spoken about kind of racial equality. We did our kind of colour brave carpool thing.
Yeah.
It feels like about 15 years ago now. Suddenly, everyone seems to have caught up to the idea that it'd be quite nice to explore some of the barriers for Black women and men in society and in business, which is reassuring, but feels like this has been going on for a very, very, very long time, and we've made very, very little progress. Do you think things are changing?
Yeah, I do. So if you go back to, I think our carpool interview was probably 3 years ago. I started with the Premier League as part of their equality standard panel in 2017, about the time I left the firm. That role is quite occasional, but involves, importantly, going around to the individual clubs and hearing presentations from them and asking the questions about what they're doing in relation to equality. And I think probably after that carpool interview in that summer, I remember going to a couple of the bigger clubs in the country, and failing them with my colleagues because we didn't feel they were doing enough. And a year later, seeing presentations from both again, they'd really turned the corner. And I think and this is not a matter of box ticking. I really feel that we've been able to get them to the point where they got it, that there was something they needed to do, but also something that would benefit their organisation by doing it. So that's been a big step forward. And I think we've seen the Premier League clubs, particularly the bigger ones that have been in the league for longest, so the biggest sort of 12 to 15 of them, I guess, are really now much more sophisticated organisations, and I think have caught up quickly with best practice, partly because of the range of diversity that they've got on the pitch. And the issue for them in many ways is to replicate that diversity or be as meritocratic as they are on the pitch, off the pitch, in the coaching side and also in the administration, and also to have that feel its way through to the crowds and what it's like to watch a game in person as well, or indeed even follow it on the internet. And what I've done in the last 9 months since the death of George Floyd was the players decided to take the knee at matches and make a statement about Black Lives Matter, which I think was very brave, and actually in many ways I think was the most visible way of keeping that issue in the public eye over the last few months. And the Premier League wanted me to help them, or basically lead on writing an action plan, which we've called the No Room for Racism Action Plan, because that was the name of the existing campaign that the league had. And that's quite wide-ranging, but of course will take time. And what we've seen in recent weeks, as you'll know, is a lot of online abuse in particular, and also even in the last week, as England have started to play some friendlies, to have some supporters back in the ground who were booing the players taking the knee, which is sad to see. But I think all part of the education process. And you can be disappointed by people deciding to boo their own team that way when they're trying to make a statement and they've made it clear that they're not making any kind of political statement. But what's encouraging for me is the number of people who have been clapping and drowning out the boos, and I think that's helped enormously and basically reflects the point that people are on a journey on this, aren't they? And some people are going to get there first.
It's just exhausting, isn't it? I think the amount of time it seems to take, and that we still seem to be stuck in this journey when you think it's a destination that everyone should just be at.
I think part of the issue is simply that it's quite hard for people to understand what other people's lives are like, and to the extent that someone's never experienced something, it doesn't really strike one as a particular issue, does it? And I think that's why so many people find it hard to really sort of empathise with what it's like to be not just a minority, but to be in a position where your life is made quite a lot more difficult at times by that condition. And that's something that I think only starts to come through people starting to think about what it's like for others and talk to them. And I think the lack of social contact between different groups, the levels of segregation we have in society are such that often people don't have that one-to-one experience where they can learn, and that makes it harder for people. So I do kind of see why it takes time to change, because it lacks that sort of personal touch.
Yeah, I mean, it's understandable, isn't it? I think I always felt that one of the first big things was to just respect someone else's truth. That is their experience, and you're never going to understand it unless you were them. But it doesn't make it any less real or true as a set of circumstances and experiences. They're just different from your own. I think it's always something I try to remember, that someone's truth is their reality, as is my own, And I think if you can start with that, then there's a whole lot more possibilities in removing your own level of ignorance about what someone else experiences. I don't know, I kind of feel like our own sort of personal journeys of kind of inclusion and understanding will kind of take forever. And then I feel like we'll be perfect human beings just before we die, maybe.
Yeah, well, certainly, I think the personal journey is something that is often understated. I remember in the carpool video, we were talking about people saying to me, "Oh, I never thought of you as black," that kind of means that they haven't really thought about what it's like for me in that situation. Well, that's just something we can talk about, but it does demonstrate the point that people can completely forget, in the same way as for a period of time they might not have known that you were gay. And in the sort of, I don't know, more than a decade that we've known each other, I think, we've both been on sort of journeys within the firm and individually that you have to go through. And I think I would like to think both made substantial progress, but also helped other people to kind of come on that journey of understanding. But I do think it is easier to understand inclusion if there's some facet of you that perhaps is routinely not included. And it almost kind of doesn't matter what that is. It gives you a key to understand that what it's like for other people. So I think that's part of building empathy. And of course, as advisors in my role now, or previously as a partner in consulting or corporate finance, actually having empathy for your client's situation is a pretty critical part of being good at your job.
Yeah.
I do worry sometimes that, I've seen a lot of people in the firm who are really, really, really bright, but don't always have the empathy to understand where the clients are coming from, and sometimes kind of give them the advice they give everyone rather than think, well, what is it really like from my client's perspective? And that empathy is critical to your job as well as, being good at inclusion, I think.
I think, what I've certainly seen and experienced over the last couple of years, in particular through sort of various lockdowns, is that that's even more important, because people are much more emotionally raw these days because of the extreme circumstances that everyone's kind of been through. Whether it's kind of losing family and loved ones, or just the major emotional trauma of trying to work remotely, or losing your job, or kind of not knowing whether you're going to have a job, or all the major changes in government and politics. I mean, it's all seems to be, over the last couple of years, designed to be a major challenge for us as human beings to kind of keep ourselves on a straight line and not go completely off the rails.
I think you saw in the way that the world reacted to George Floyd's death last year that it landed at a point when probably on balance we didn't have as much to do as we normally did, and we were all feeling a bit raw and shocked, and an event that's happened probably, unfortunately, many times in the past really took hold of people's consciousness in a way that perhaps it wouldn't have done at any other point in history.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think things are much more raw now, aren't they? And I think, these kind of situations have more of an impact. But like you say, that, there are many, many, many other examples before him. Unfortunately, they've been many after him as well. And then I found it quite interesting, the kind of, that's kind of America. I'm like, well, it's not really. That's kind of everywhere. Here, Paul, tell me a bit about, what one of the things that we've been trying to explore with folks on these interviews is, was there a sort of a key set of skills that you think you developed at PwC that you've taken with you since PwC?
Yeah, I think inevitably over 21 years in the firm, there's probably quite a lot. I mean, I would say that people often think about PwC people because of their technical abilities often, and I would say that that's probably the smallest part of my kind of learning, or what I used in the firm, to be honest, but certainly what I've taken with me. I find it very useful to have some experience in finance and strategy and people stuff, but it's the people skills that I think are the real expertise that top people at PwC have. I mean, and many people actually all levels have. We get very bright, I still say we, years later after leaving, because it's kind of sort of threw me like a stick of rock, I suppose.
In your blood.
Yeah, well, it is in a way. It means the firm means a lot to me, and it's as you go through your life and over such a long period of time, especially as I started, then left, came back 7 years later, and then spent 21 years in the firm. So I've been associated in some way with the firm for probably 30 years or so. So I'd say it's the interpersonal skills, how to learn how to deal with other people, how to lead people, what's important, how to work out quite quickly what's important to someone who's not telling you. These are really important skills. And of course, as you go into an organization as a non-exec where you're only there occasionally and you're not physically in the building that much, then having an antennae that functions reasonably well to try and work out more quickly than you might otherwise do what people are thinking, having been through all these quite difficult client experiences that are demanding and asking you for advice in a pretty real-time basis, having to make decisions, and get to know people and build trust. All those skills, I think, come out very sharply in a non-exec career, because you don't have the length of contact time to build that up. You have to do it much more quickly. So yeah, it's those interpersonal skills that I think really are what I rely on particularly.
That's interesting. Like you say, that's kind of the essence of what it is to engage with human beings, isn't it? And be effective.
Yeah. And that's at the bottom line what the firm does, isn't it? I mean, we've always said firm's greatest asset is its people, or only assets in some ways, and the technology all helps, particularly when you're stuck with difficult situations like the pandemic and having to use technology to bridge the gap. But ultimately, what the technology does is make the connection with people more easy, despite the distance and the segregation that we have. So yeah, it's all about people in the end, and you can be the greatest technical advisor you like, but if people don't trust you, they won't listen to your advice. But
yeah, I think we forget that sometimes, that it's about the human connection, and then the technical stuff is all extra, but it's not the other way around.
Yeah, and I think where people are particularly important in PwC is when you've got the ability to bring together lots of different disciplines, different types of diverse groups of people to try and solve a single problem, or maybe a multifaceted problem, and that's a real skill. And I think perhaps we learn to do it. There's no training course that tells you how to do it, but we learn to do it over our careers, and that becomes in many ways second nature. Perhaps we do take it for granted, but I think it's being the entry point for a client to an incredible wide range of service that most people don't even know, couldn't even name them all, or even half of them, and be able to make sense of all that and bring it together in a way that works for the client and solves their issue and creates some value. I mean, that's kind of what I do in small chunks now on a daily basis.
I'm always amazed when people are trying to understand PwC. I'm like, stop trying to understand it, because it's something it changes every day, and there's new things every day. You just got to try and keep riding the wave and be as useful as possible in the meantime.
Yeah, and there's all those attempts over time, haven't there, to try and write a system or a directory that enables you to find your way around. And I remember someone joining the firm and saying, as a director, I think it was, and he said, "This place is just amazing. It's got the widest range of skills and people I've ever come across. How on earth do you find your way around it? I mean, is there a directory? Is there a kind of instruction manual for using PwC?" And someone said, "Oh no, there's nothing like that. And when you've been here for 25 years, you'll be fine." I guess the challenge for the firm in an era of increasing complexity is to speed up the 25 years, isn't it? But
I think some of the tech we've got these days is making it a little bit easier. But I always felt like that was the best and the worst thing, and it was the same thing, like the informality of the networks, and the kind of organic evolution of skill and capability and experience was amazing, as it gave you amazing scope to do new things yourself. And if it was all structured and organized, religiously almost, then you wouldn't get the opportunities that you got.
And I think there were times in my recollection when, in the consulting practice in particular, people did try and structure and organize it that way, and it did kind of threaten to kill it at times. And it's the strongest thing really for the firm, because it's very hard to replicate that sort of organic collection of ideas and people.
Yeah, I mean, you won't be surprised that I still sit back and watch some of those new people come in and try to put structure in. I'm like, okay, let's see. Let me just get myself a cup of tea and watch this happen. And eventually, they learn to embrace the organic nature of the firm. Here, so tell me about the future. What's we had like a crazy few years. You've got some. I wasn't aware of all of your new roles. I mean, it sounds like you've got an amazing portfolio now. And some nice local stuff as well, which is good. I'm pleased to say that my Guy's and St Thomas's experience has always been fantastic, and I got my second COVID vaccine from there, and it was, the most remarkable thing I would say in terms of some feedback for you was to see care delivered in person, and to feel that was really amazing. I had a bit of a moment, I think, a bit of a PwC moment. You'll remember those, where I was feeling slightly less than cared for, which happens occasionally still, unfortunately. and I went to go and have my first jab, and I just thought, this is amazing. This is what care looks like, and this is what care feels like. I just think it's remarkable. The human beings of the NHS, when they're on the front line delivering that care, was amazing.
Well, it's great to hear the feedback, and that's very much, care is very much written into the trust values and what it tries to do. And I think, importantly, there's no belief that everyone gets that perfect experience every time. I mean, like any organisation, it always has to improve, and we have to work at that. But we often remind ourselves about this in board meetings, where we start them quite often with a patient care story. Someone will come in and say what it's like, and not all those stories are positive. But I think the mixture of the heartwarming positive ones and where we can learn, it does keep the organisation moving forward, and I think that's really important. But caring was one of the topics I remember we talked about in that carpool interview, about how people in the firm needed to care more, and how someone had observed that I cared about someone in a way that they thought it was almost strange. But I've always cared about it, and I think it's really, really critical. And I think it's that those issues are there for every organisation, whether it's, I see it in the police, and whether the communities of London all feel that the police care enough for them. Is open to question, whether they use it in football in terms of player care. Whether a new signing turns up at a club and fits in is often down to whether or not people care for them enough to kind of look out for them and help them fit in the way that a PwC person would if they go on secondment to some foreign country. It's all about, when you land, do people kind of pull the stops out or leave you to sink or swim? That's all down to caring, and it's very much a thread that runs through all the organisations I work with.
I feel like this is the preeminent topic of the next stage of our evolution as human beings, that it doesn't really matter what you're doing, but if you can do it with a sense of care, and that obviously involves human connection and humor, and really putting yourself in other people's shoes, then you differentiate yourself, and you get to the bottom of the real issues and challenges, and can actually make things better and create an impact.
At the moments in my career when I've thought, oh dear, I'm in trouble here, it's been the fact that the people involved in the situation have known that I cared about them, and that they know I would do my best. They trusted me, that led them to give me the benefit of the doubt when I needed it. And I think, you're right. We're always talking about differentiation and how we find that in whatever walk of life, how we become the best of what we do, and that human aspect. I think it's very much if you can pull it off consistently. And it's difficult because it has to be authentic, because people care in their own way, don't they? But you still have to, it's not whether you care, it's whether other people think that you care as well that's important. So you have to be able to communicate that care as well.
Yeah, no, I think that was why I hear so much about it, almost kind of academically and theoretically, that when I walked in to the sort of tent, the temporary tent where I had my first vaccine, to feel care as an experience was quite emotional. Like to feel it, and I think I just thought that was pretty amazing.
Sadly, it's the case that in the same way as we worry about abuse online and stuff like that for footballers and other people, actually people working in NHS in person get abuse from patients all the time.
It's horrendous.
Of all sorts, and whether that's because people are drunk or whether it's racial abuse or whatever, sadly that happens. And that's one of the things we have to try and protect our staff from, and they continue to care for people regardless of all that.
Yeah, it's amazing, which is why they deserve a much more significant pay rise, I would say.
Indeed, yes. That has been mentioned.
What do you think, I don't know, if you reflect on sort of our alumni network, the 70,000+ of them, what do you think they could do, or we could do, in terms of the PwC folks that kind of run and coordinate the network? What do you think we could do better or do specifically that would help you in what you're doing these days?
Well, it's hard to think of specific things, but I guess connectivity is probably the thing that over the years, the firm probably hasn't got the best out of its alumni, just through you're kind of in the firm or you're out, and maybe there needs to feel a bit like there's more of a halfway house. There was a period of time where if you left the firm, I'm going back a long time now, when if you left the firm, that was it. You'd never come back.
Yeah.
That's been gone for a long time, but it feels quite black and white. It feels you're either in or you're not. Maybe there's a way to make people feel like they belong more, so that they're more likely to reach back into the firm or be there as a source of help in an informal way as well. The 70,000 people is a big number, and I would know a few of them, but whether I can find them in the way that you can find other people in PwC with a directory and stuff like that, I don't know. Every now and again, again, like the way that you work in the firm, outside the firm, you rely entirely on your personal networks, and probably it's even more important because you haven't got a directory other than LinkedIn to look people up. So I'd say that, improving connectivity is what this is all about. It comes back to the point you asked just now about the future. Well, I guess the future, we've shown by its absence what human connectivity is worth. We've found ways of replacing real human connectivity with this sort of virtual world as well, and we can see that we can do that to an extent. But working to improve the connectivity between the alumni network and the people still in the firm, I think would be of value to everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we spend quite a lot of time exploring, and it's one of those things where some of the new technology that we've been pushing it as hard as we can. So we should be in the process of announcing something shortly in terms of new sort of digital platforms to improve that connectivity. And much as I kind of sit with my cup of tea watching others try to digitize and put structure into PwC to make it easier to navigate, I'm going to be a victim of other people watching to see how we do that with the alumni network as well. I think a lot of work's been done to try to do that, so to make it easier. We weren't happy with some of our sort of digital platforms for alumni. Just wasn't really cutting it, to be honest. I never particularly liked it. So we have a new platform which we will be launching quite soon, actually, for everyone, which should make it significantly easier to find people that you knew and those that you didn't know, and to create kind of communities and groups and kind of navigate your own way around it without having to rely entirely on those personal networks. But I think the personal networks are still so amazingly powerful.
That's still the strength inside the firm, isn't it? Despite all the technology and connectivity. So the same is almost certainly going to be true outside. I think there's also at the heart of it something about the brand of the firm as well. And one of the reasons why I guess McKinsey's the best example of people who perhaps have been seen to be good at alumni networks over the years. There's a certain cachet to McKinsey, but I think there is to PwC too. The more time I spend outside the firm, the more I realise it, to be honest. I mean, in a couple of different ways. One, because I go into other organisations and think, well, I knew PwC was good, but this is making it look even better all the time. And that happens wherever I go, frankly, to a greater or lesser extent. And I think also when I still mentor people who I've worked with in the firm. Some of them are still in the firm, some of them have moved on, some of them have moved on and come back. And the common theme is that in almost all cases, when people have decided to move on and try their luck somewhere else, the grass turns out not to be greener. And I think that's something that perhaps people underestimate the value of the firm's brand and just how good it is sometimes from the inside. And it's not perfect. And I think I often said that, PwC was, when I was there, I felt was 95% perfect. And I probably spent the last 10 years of my career working on the 5% that wasn't, to try and make it better. And that can kind of leave you with a bit of a kind of, I guess, not the correct overall view of the place. But I've certainly found that, since I left, that it's pretty much unbeatable as an organisation, but I'm not sure how well people in the organisation always understand that. It always needs to improve, but it's very, very good. And I suspect that kind of branding people have and the pride of the organisation could be captured more in some way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's one of the reasons why I always try to have sort of external roles, trustee roles and things like that, or charity roles, just to give myself some perspective. And I think the last few years I've kind of finished my terms on some of those boards, and I do really miss that external perspective, because it's like you say, you get focused on that 5%, and then you can get distorted quite easily.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of folks within PwC that could do with, including myself, making sure that they have some external roles just in order just to have some perspective. And I think it actually makes you a better PwC person and a better advisor on your external roles as well, to have that balance.
And in relation to the future more generally, I just think it's just incredibly hard to predict, isn't it? I mean, we've all seen that. No one would have predicted the events of the last 15 months. And actually, when I look back through my career, those awful interview questions when you're asked, what will you be doing in 5 years' time? I would never, ever have been right, not even close. So I've always tried to think about, what in general terms am I trying to achieve? Where do I want to be going in the way I want to feel about things? And not to try and be too specific about exactly what it's going to look like, where I'm going to be, who I'm going to be doing it with, and try and make it much more generically about what I value, what's important to me. And that stuff doesn't change so much. And I think if you have that sort of attitude, then you can kind of go with the flow a bit and react to the circumstances. If you're too rigid, I must have this particular job, I must be in this particular place, I must be with these particular people, it's much harder. You're much more likely to be disappointed as the world changes and moves away from it. So that agility is something else that I guess I've always felt I've had, and that the firm's been pretty good at. I think Kevin's done a good job at steering the firm in the recent years from what I've seen from the outside, and making sure that it uses the kind of environmental conditions to its advantage rather than just getting swept along.
That's quite a nice sort of segue into my sort of final question, which is really about your passions. Can you reflect on sort of what your passions were as you kind of came into the firm, and how those sort of passions have really helped impact the direction that you took through the firm and then beyond the firm?
Thinking about that, I mean, the three things that spring to mind, I guess, in terms of real passions of mine are people, something about equality, and everyone having a chance to do things well, and because that's all I ever wanted. And of course, sport's always been a very important thing to me, and I think it, in many ways, those three areas have been a constant feature of my life, and certainly my PwC career. I ended up, as you know, doing a lot of work in people-related stuff, especially in relation to diversity and inclusion, and that's continued since I've left. I think that links also into the equality side of things. But the people stuff, I mean much more generically about getting the best out of everybody, and that's really, really, really important to me. And I think the equality of opportunity point and the individual coaching, the more general leadership points all come together. And sport's always been important to me as a kind of as a social thing as well as a hobby, in that I found that was a great way to build relationships and get to know people and find common ground. And of course, I've ended up working in roles that reflect all of those things. I'm working in football. I do a lot of work in diversity and inclusion, and the people side of it drives everything I do, really. So I think those have been kind of what they were the things I was passionate about when I started, and they're still there today. I think that great thread of continuity in my sort of personal and working life has been very important to me. And we were saying that it's funny how things have turned out. When I was a kid growing up with my mum, my dad wasn't around, but one thing I knew about him was he was a doctor and he was trained at Guy's Hospital, and now I'm on the board there. And we were living, because we didn't have our own place, we were living with my mum's uncle, and he was a former Met police officer. So, my kind of life sort of gone full circle, and I started watching football at Crystal Palace when I was 8, and now I'm working with the Premier League. So there's some great constants through this incredible sort of turmoil that's gone on at various points in my life. But those sort of reference points that have always been there, I think, are really powerful and part of my identity. And of course, PwC is a big part of my identity as well.
It's a good reminder, isn't it, for folks who might be watching this, just about reflecting on your passion and thinking about that, and then how that kind of weaves into your career and your personal life.
People will often feel the pressure to do things that they're not actually really going to enjoy because they're not really passionate about it, aren't they? So do I want to go and be a FTSE 100 board member for the sake of it, just to be able to say I'm a FTSE 100 board member, working in something like retail or some other industry that I'm not particularly passionate about? Well, it's probably not a great idea for me to do that. But some people would kind of decide that that's the status they want and go and do it for the wrong reason. I've tried to stick closer to home to the things that matter to me, that have always mattered to me. And I think that's, for me, certainly, I need to be motivated and excited and passionate about what I do to get out of bed in the morning. I'm absolutely hopeless at things where I'm not passionate about it.
Me too. I always remember getting feedback a few years ago. Actually, it was quite a while ago, about it saying, and the partner who was giving me the feedback was saying, the trouble with you, Andy, is that, as a partner, you've got a reputation for only doing work that you love with people that you enjoy working with.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what's wrong with that? And by the way, let me just give you a list of the people I don't enjoy working with that I have to work with. It's a great opportunity if you can shape it for yourself to do the work that you love with people that you love working with, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's the way to get the best out of yourself, in my experience. I'm sure some people do, do jobs that they don't enjoy and they do them to the best of their ability and doing well. But I just, personally, I find that quite hard. So the passions do, they are critical to what I do now, and they always have been.
Cool. Hey, Paul, it's always a pleasure catching up with you, and I always find it therapeutic because you remind me.
I'll send you an invoice.
Yeah, you can bill me for this if you like. It does give me some perspective. So I appreciate that, and you've always been really good at that. I've always really appreciated that kind of balance and perspective. It helps me immensely, and I can be sure it will help lots of people listening to this as well. So thank you so much for your time. It's lovely to get a little glimpse into your place in SE1.
Yeah,
it looks lovely, and best of luck with the year ahead, and hopefully I'll catch up with you face to face at some point.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much for having me on this interview this morning. It's been really nice. It's always good to connect. And but let's do it in person before too long.